Hey friends, this summer we wanted to do something really special and give you a behind-the-scenes look at some of our classic episodes.
But before we do that, we have a quick announcement. We're planning a conference called Gather that will be this September 15th and 16th in Provo, Utah. And the event is being put on by a coalition of people that exist in the LGBTQ Latter-day space.
Yeah, it's going to be Christ-centered and church-positive, and it will also be really expansive, including people on a variety of paths. So some of the speakers we have planned are Steve Young, Tom Christofferson, Liv Mendoza-Haynes, Megan Decker, Yesse Wilson, Michael Soto, Allison Dayton, Ben Shalati, and Charlie Bird.
It's going to be great. And you can get more details at gather-conference.com and come and gather with us this September.
And hope you enjoy these classic episodes.
All right. Well, today we're talking about what are the stages of coming out? One of my very favorite episodes.
Yeah, with Scott Christofferson. I was listening back to this, and I was like, my first note was, this is the most important thing.
It's really good. So the diversity and belonging class I taught at BYU for 3 years, I had all my students listen to this episode.
Yeah.
So many people ask, how do I help my friends who are LGBTQ? And what I tell them is it depends. Like, it depends on where they are and what they're experiencing and where they're at in the process, because different people need different things at different times.
Yeah, it's such good practical information. It was interesting because I did that chapter in my book where I deep dove into this. And I remember using this podcast episode kind of as a reference for that, but I really looked more into the theory itself and tried to pull in a lot of experiences from client patterns I'd seen in therapy. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because as I was listening to, when we recorded this podcast, this was the first time I'd heard about this model really. Mm-hmm. And I would actually move a lot of the experiences I talked about into different stages of the model.
Because you were just learning it as we were talking.
Yeah, I was like, oh, in this stage I was doing this, and now I'm like, oh, younger Charlie, that's definitely a stage 1 thing, and you're talking about it in stage 2. And I guess in the end it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But I remember talking about in stage 4, which is I was talking about stage 5 identity pride stuff, and I was just like, why are you saying that? That's the wrong stage. And I just thought that was funny to think back on.
That's really funny. The moment that stood out to me as I re-listened to it for this was when Scott talked about going to visit a therapist, and the therapist warned him against black and white thinking.
For sure.
And I thought that was so good and so helpful, just to help people understand that is something that happens. We go from from white to black and black to white, just these super stark contrasts, these big pendulum swings.
Yeah, I remember him. I think the phrase he used was don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, mm-hmm. which I've actually heard a lot in the context of coming out and re-examining your values and things. And I just appreciated the careful way he described going about that in his life, and just talking about these ways he was raised that he loves and appreciates and cares for, and identifying which things he wanted to move forward with no matter what happened. Yeah. I think that's a really healthy way to find stability and still be able to connect with family and tradition, and I just like that.
Yeah. And fun fact about Scott. So back then I used to answer all of our emails, mm-hmm. and we got a slew of emails after this particular episode because Scott is beloved and has so many friends. And he posted about it, and it got a ton of traction just because he shared it.
Yeah, that's awesome. A couple other things I pulled from it. There's something you said that gutted me.
What did I say?
I remember feeling gutted in the moment, but we just had to move forward. It was when you were talking about praying to be made straight, and how you read the scripture about how they prostrated themselves on the ground, and so you laid.
Yeah, I laid on the ground. I remember where I was living and I remember doing that multiple times.
That's so devastating to hear about. The idea that you hated yourself so much that you're oh, the reason is because I'm not humble enough. I'm not physically prostrating myself, laying flat out on the ground.
Yep.
And I just, first, just as your friend, that made me sad for little you,
I was 28.
For my aged you. And also just the idea that still is the kind of shame and self-worth people have about themselves.
Yeah.
Where it's a very punitive God.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of gay Latter-day Saints grow up with this idea of a God who punishes and a God who they have to I don't know, it runs contrary to the loving divine I'm a child of God narrative that we're fed.
Yeah.
And it just makes me sad that it gets lost in translation so much because of the orientation.
Yeah. And honestly, like I wasn't viewing God as being like vindictive or like punishing me. Like I wasn't viewing God that way at all. I like when this happened, I had just met this guy at a church activity, like a regional church activity, and I thought he was so cool. I had the biggest crush on him. I was living in Washington at the time, and I was just like so terrified by how much I liked this guy I just met. I was like, I gotta fix this.
Yeah.
And so what happened was I went home and I like looked him up on Facebook and was like reading through his posts and looking at his pictures. I was like, this is terrible. I have to stop this.
Yeah. And then the shame that comes in from doing something that's so common.
Yeah, just who doesn't Facebook stalk someone they think is cute?
Well,
I wonder what happened to him. I haven't seen him since I moved away from Washington.
I wonder if how do you think it'd be now if you went back in and like Facebook stalked him, even if it was crush?
This was more than 10 years ago, so he's probably bald now.
I know, but like, what's the difference? Like, how have you changed?
I think I wouldn't feel that shame about it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, having done that with other people the time since.
Well, I love this.
I've still my other cute guys that I sometimes look up their pictures and post though
on Facebook
or Instagram.
You're such a grandma, Ben.
I know.
But yeah, this episode's amazing. I also took a note. I said each stage is so important. Every stage, I was like, this is the most important stage people to know about. And then the next one, I'm like, this one too.
Yeah.
So it really is I think one of our most robust episodes for anyone looking for practical information.
Yeah, and one thing I've learned is even having like a conceptual knowledge of this, it doesn't help you move through them any differently. I feel like, you just have to allow yourself to grow and experience and just be. It's like you can't help a teenager not be like the teenagers think like teenagers.
Yeah.
That's just what happens. And you just have to be with people as they go through this. I have a good friend who started dating and like he was totally in the gay adolescence. And he knows all this. Like he knows he's going to listen to this episode and hear me talking about him.
Yeah.
But he still like did the thing,
Yeah.
And you just kind of have to let yourself experience the different parts of being you.
Yeah. And I think if anything, it's so good for normalizing though, like realizing, oh, this is normal. There's nothing wrong with me. And even for family members to see, oh, this is a typical thing that happens. This isn't some sort of outlier experience. And then you can be less worried, less anxious about yourself or your loved ones.
Yeah.
One other thing I just wanted to note is the last stage talking about synthesis. Well, first of all, I told that story of like going to church during Pride. And it's funny because I also included that story in my most recent book. But when I told it on the podcast, I like spun it a way that was a little bit like it was true. What I said in the podcast was true, but in reality, there was actually a really negative experience that same day in that same church. And it's just reminded me of how sometimes we like feel like we can't talk about the hard things and like we have to like pretend everything's so good. Because it was true. Like it was a very like, this is me embracing both parts of myself. And as I was doing it, there was also this third party person who did something really messed up and made that a hard thing to do. Yeah. And it just reminded me that like synthesis is hard when you keep going to church, because church isn't always a place where you're like accepted or allowed to synthesize with your identity. And I think that's why we see so many people getting stuck in that stage 5 prides, like because they don't feel honored or respected, and they can't like we have a hard time just making it an aspect of who we are when it is brought up as this huge thing all the time in society. Yeah. And when you walk into the church doors, there are ways you're treated differently. There are ways that policy impact you differently. There are a lot of misconceptions or preconceived notions. And when you go into that space, that's when it kind of like flares up. Yeah. So just to note that like, if you're a church member who wants to help LGBTQ individuals feel synthesized with their identity and like be able to live more normally, we have to like have a level of understanding and respect and safety in religious spaces. And then a lot of these issues that we see will like simmer down.
Yeah. And similarly, I felt something similar going into LGBTQ spaces as a person who's still active in the church. Exactly. And I think in many aspects of our lives, we could do a better job of just like letting people be where they are and just trusting them and being welcoming and kind.
Yeah. And synthesis can look different for different people. depending on your beliefs or your geographic location, like I love that. It's hard to synthesize when you're gay going to church, and it's hard to synthesize when you're a churchgoer among gays. And hopefully we can just build out the middle ground.
Yeah. All right. Well, hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Questions from the Closet. I'm Charlie Bird.
And I'm Ben Shalati. Each episode we discuss a question that we commonly get asked as LGBTQ Latter-day Saints.
We are not trying to answer this question or come to a consensus, but simply sharing our perspectives.
Today's question is, what are the stages of coming out?
Ben and I are not terribly diverse, and we share many opinions and life experiences. For example, we both studied social work at BYU.
However, there are some pretty big differences. For example, I finished the program a year and a half ago.
And I just barely got admitted.
Yeah. What led you to do social work at BYU?
I wanted to be back in Utah, especially because I was doing a lot more advocacy work, and I was working on my book, and I knew I needed to be in this region. And I just wanted to learn more about how to empower people. And the program was a really good fit, so I came back. Wow. And I like BYU. I really do.
Yeah, I did not want to come back to BYU or Utah.
Neither did I.
There was winter here and too many Latter-day Saints. I wanted to stay in Arizona, but here I came, and here I am still.
Well, we would like to provide a variety of voices and perspectives, so today we're joined by Scott Christofferson.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Scott.
Yeah, so I am a senior product marketing manager at Adobe. I've been there for almost 5 years. Really enjoy that. I also do some interior design work on the side, and so I really enjoy that. I actually just finished my first Parade of Homes in 2020.
It was stunning.
And Charlie actually helped me to stage some of the rooms, moving furniture, and just kind of figuring out some of the layouts. So
Scott helped me live my HGTV dream. You did a really good job. It was beautiful.
Hey, thanks.
So today we're talking about the stages of coming out, and I've just got to let everyone know that we were actually going to talk about a different question, and we just barely changed because we felt like we should. So hopefully it's a win.
So what I'm going to do is talk about the 6 stages of coming out, and then we'll just talk about our experiences in each of the stages.
Cool.
All right, so this is CASS's Stages of Identity Development. It's CASS, C-A-S-S. It's an old model that came out, I think, in 1979. But I really like it because it really reflects my experience and the experience of a lot of people that I know. So there are 6 stages. The first stage is called identity confusion. And this is when feelings of same-sex attraction are not acceptable. People who will later identify as LGBTQ will identify as heterosexual, and they'll be doing that honestly, like they're not lying. And they'll be looking for assurances that they're LGBT and seeking information online. And often this is a time when LGBTQ folks will pursue heterosexual marriage.
I think it's funny that it says seek information online because I took so many online quizzes, like am I gay quizzes, and I would purposely choose the answers that sounded the most straight to me. So the quiz would tell me that I was straight, and then I could prove to myself that I was straight and like reinforce the idea that I was heterosexual.
And meanwhile, I'm like, was the internet even a thing when I was thinking about this? Because I'm not sure.
Well, when I was a teenager, we had dial-up internet and like one computer in our dining room, so there was no way I would have looked this up online.
I'm interested, Ben. It says that you honestly believe you're heterosexual, which I did as well, but there was always an element of confusion there too. So it's like you honestly believe it, but you know it's a lie at the same time. Did you experience that, Scott?
Yeah, I would say one thing that was interesting for me is I think honestly other people knew that I was gay before I did. And so I'm just expressing myself in just however I want to, right? I'm acting naturally. I'm trying to be loving and just live my life. And I'm starting to get feedback that maybe the way that I behave isn't acceptable, or maybe I am different. And so I think that was one of the biggest challenges, was going, hey, I'm just being me, and why are they saying that this isn't good? And I think that was probably the hardest part for me that presented the confusion. I wasn't even thinking about, am I gay, am I straight?
So my experience was like being gay wasn't an option. Like that just didn't fit into reality, so it just couldn't be a thing.
Yeah, and like there were no gay people in my life. Right. Like I didn't know what that meant or what it was. But I did know that I had feelings about other like guys that were concerning to me, but I would just like push them away or pretend it was something else or lie to myself in some creative way to make it feel like that wasn't an issue.
Yeah. I remember this conversation I had with someone. It was like in 8th grade, and I remember kind of validating someone's thought around homosexuality and how I was like, yeah, I've heard it's like a mental disorder and like it's something that like And it was almost like I was like, if I express this, it will never be part of my narrative. I'm not sure if it is, but right now it's feeling like something that's scary because it's a possibility.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
For the straight listeners, you are very unlikely to be part of someone's journey because this is a very internal part.
At this point?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Like, I didn't tell anyone during my stage 1.
No. I mean, it's like the moment you say it, you can't unsay it, and then somehow it's true.
Yeah. And at this stage, I was scared of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, stage 2. Stage 2 is known as identity comparison. And this is still when people who later identify as LGBTQ don't typically identify as gay. A word like homosexual feels safer, or SSA. People compartmentalize their identity and behavior. They'll be like, well, I'm not gay, but they'll still engage in like no-string same-sex behavior. And they'll also feel a lot of shame and guilt while trying to find a cure for their attractions.
I think this was the majority of, like, this stage was the longest for me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with most Latter-day Saints or religious people that I've talked to, this stage lasts a long time because there's a lot of, like, pressure to try to go back into stage 1.
I remember when I talked to my mom for the first time about it, I remember she said, is anyone else involved? As if she kind of knew what these stages were.
Mm-hmm. Intuitively.
Yeah. And that wasn't the way that I experienced it, but it is sort of this, hey, I'm having these thoughts and I'm experiencing these things, but it feels safe because it's from a distance.
Yeah. You know, I also didn't engage in no-strings same-sex behavior, but I did look up pictures of Dean Cain on the internet, and I would say, well, I'm not gay. I just wish I looked like Dean Cain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I did that all the time, too. And especially with, like, I think I've said this before on a previous episode, but if I would have a crush on a guy at school or whatever, I'd be like, no, that's not what it is. I just think he's, like, popular and cool, and I want to look like him and have his friends. Mm-hmm. And, like, you talk yourself out of it a lot.
Yeah, I think admiration is like a reasonable substitute for attraction.
Right.
You can say, I admire this person, and so therefore that's what it is.
Right, for sure. And then at the same time, I think this is a good point about not identifying as gay. I would never have imagined I would ever identify as gay.
Same.
And like even identifying as having feelings of same-sex attraction, because like that removed it from me multiple times, because it's not something I am, it's something that I feel, and it's not gay, it's same-sex attraction. Like anything I could do to start admitting it to myself, but push it as far away from me and make it as safe as humanly possible, and try to push myself back into stage 1. Mm-hmm. That's what I was doing.
Right. And I also just want to say, like, just because someone identifies as like homosexual or same-sex attracted instead of gay doesn't mean that they're like less evolved or less okay with their sexual orientation. And there are you can identify in a lot of different ways and be like very healthy.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think going back to like a previous episode where you guys talked about the word queer, I mean, it's really just comes down to sometimes your own experience and where you kind of feel comfortable identifying. And
Scott, did you feel like shame or guilt or ever seek a cure for this part of you?
Yeah, so definitely felt, shame. I don't know about I think there was an element of guilt for sure, because I remember specifically thinking, I needed to like tell my bishop about this, but I didn't have anything to tell him. I didn't have something to repent from. I remember waking up like on Sunday mornings and I would feel like this pit in my stomach of, I need to go face these people who would reject me if they knew how I was maybe feeling. It was intense at times, and I think that was something that was incredibly challenging, but I did not... no conversion therapy or anything like that. I do remember having a conversation with my mom, and I think I was about 17, and she said, do you experience same-sex attraction? And then I can't remember how the conversation went exactly, but she was like, would you like to see a therapist? Like, what do you want to do? I think she just didn't know. She wanted to offer help. She wanted to be supportive, but maybe didn't know how or really what to do.
Yeah, so when I was in this stage, I was like fasting and praying to change a lot. And I never went to like a conversion therapist. I just decided that I didn't want to tell anyone that I was going to become my own conversion therapist. Yeah. So I like looked up how to do it online and was reading like psychological studies and pamphlets from like the 60s and 70s and doing these like weird and damaging methods on myself. And I also think just from talking to people, I'm not the only person who has done that. And that's really scary when I think about like people who are still maybe in the stage and feeling like they want some sort of change or some sort of cure.
Totally. Yeah. Even just hearing you say that, I literally could just see myself kneeling at my bedside, like praying to be changed. I kind of like,
yeah,
I can't believe I did that, honestly. I mean, I can, but it's so interesting to look back and think just where I was as far as from just like a mental space and how I was feeling about myself.
Yeah, you know, I remember this time where I met this guy that was really cool. I like stalked him on Facebook, and I just felt so guilty after for just like looking at this cute guy on Facebook. And I remember like reading about like prayer in the topical guide, like find out how to get prayers answered. And there were some verses about people like lying prostrate on the ground. So I like laid on the ground. I was like, I haven't been praying hard enough. Maybe if I like lay on the ground, God will answer my prayer. And I just like prayed for him to change me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It did not work.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, it didn't. Yeah. And this was, I don't know. Yeah. These were like probably my darkest days. And again, I don't want to be too repetitive, but this was a period of my life when I was never really actively suicidal, but I would be jealous of people who got cancer. Or if someone was like in an accident, I would want that for me. And I would look around and say, is there like any way to escape this? Like, how can I change? How can I not be me? And that's tough.
It is really tough. In fact, I feel like, unfortunately, even till now, I've kind of led a life of avoidance. It's like, if I continue to avoid this thing, it will just somehow either magically go away, or the world will end, or, I mean, I don't know what. It was just, I need to push.
There will be some silver bullet that fixes everything.
Yeah. Like, there's no way that this is real.
Well, another thing I want to say about this stage is, again, it's a more personal stage. It is not something that people generally share. So just from an ally perspective, I think, I don't know if this is the hardest stage I was in, but it was really difficult. And like I said, the longest. And you don't know. So there are people around you that are going through this and feeling this way that we have no idea about. And so the things we say and the things we do are really important, because when someone's this like fledgling and vulnerable and fragile, like good friends and good support system can make a world of difference.
Yeah. I actually was just, the other day I was having a conversation with my mom, and, you know, her comment was just, what can we do? What more can we do to support? And she works with a lot of kids because she's a librarian. And I said, I bet there are about somewhere between 50 and 100 kids that you see regularly who are gay. And I said, and I bet you know who they are. And she said, I do. And, you know, she's just saying, what else can I do besides love them? And I think that's what you can do. And I think creating a safe space for them, and maybe even giving them a little bit of extra attention, maybe that is what they need.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, I love attention.
So for straight people who are with LGBTQ loved ones in this stage, it's important to not try and force an identity on someone. You know, give them patience, be patient, give them space. Avoid an either or approach. Like, either they come out or they don't. Either they're gay or they're straight. Like, just give people space to figure out things and just be someone they can talk to about all this. Stage 3 is identity tolerance. So this is when LGBTQ folks will start to try on a homosexual identity, and they'll start to peek into the LGBTQ world a little bit to end social isolation and loneliness. And there may be some culture shock that may lead to more identity confusion, because the LGBTQ world might be like a scary place that they don't quite want to be.
I think this nailed it. Where'd you find this? I love this. I love these stages.
Well, it's been around since 1979.
I know. I didn't know about this. Like this is like so telling of my experience. I remember the first time I said I was gay, and I like I said, I was trying it on. It was like as if it were an article of clothing that I wanted to see if it fit me. Like, will these jeans fit me, and will I like be able to move in them and sit down comfortably? Like, will this word work with me? And I was very tentative about it. And then I started like associating with gay people and looking into things, and it was so weird, because like half the time I was like, whoa, I've never seen this before. I was overwhelmed, or it was like flashy. I felt like I was like watching a spectacle. And other times I was like, oh, I feel like I really fit in here, and what these people are saying and how they feel, it really echoes my own lived experiences. And it was just all like coming together slowly.
Yeah. Well, I remember, so I first came out to my two best friends when I was 23, and one of them was Mitch. And about a month later, this was in August, about a month later, I was taking some psychology classes at BYU. I got this email about some event about homosexuality or something. And I really wanted to go to like find out what it was like, but I didn't want to go by myself. So I asked Mitch if he would come, and he brought his wife, and I was just so glad they both came. And then when I got there, this kid who I assumed was gay took a lot of interest in me and was asking me questions. And I kind of felt like he was flirting with me, and I like freaked out, and we left.
Wow.
Yeah.
The one that got away.
And that man was Scott Christofferson.
That's not true.
Right.
I guess it could be. Who knows?
I don't know either. I can't remember.
Probably wasn't.
No, I just think for this point, I mean, I don't remember actually for sure the first time that I said I was gay out loud. I think that I had started dating before I actually said it. Ultimately, what pushed me to really communicate to my family in like a very distinct way, like what I anticipate that this will look like, was because I had actually like ended a relationship, and I didn't feel like I could talk to them about it because I had not told them that I was dating. I believe that I was guided to have those experiences that ultimately pushed me to be honest and clear about my intentions, and it really opened the door for my family to really know me and for me to really know them.
When you and I started hanging out, I knew you were gay. You knew I was gay. I don't think we ever mentioned that for months, maybe until I even like invited you to be on this podcast.
No.
How often do you like talk about your sexual orientation? Is it like a common topic of conversation for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I feel like it comes up like almost daily. The interesting thing about it, though, is that I feel like at times I've wanted to really emphasize like this isn't the only thing that defines me. I don't want people to be like, oh, my gay friend, my gay uncle, my gay brother. And while in many ways I don't necessarily seek that label, I also don't mind it either. I think it's like, it is a unique identifier. It is true. It's part of my identity, and I think that it's something that's important, and I think at times I've maybe pushed that away, even after coming out, even after acknowledging who I am. At times I want to downplay it, and I think there's still elements of homophobia or just, hey, I don't want to make someone else feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But what I have found is that there's so much richness in just being able to share all of yourself with other people.
Okay, great. So for straight people who are with LGBTQ loved ones in this stage, it's important to help people realize, there's not a one-size-fits-all LGBTQ experience, because going to the LGBTQ world can be scary, and there's not one way to be gay, there's not one way to be a member of the church, and help people figure out what works for them and help them just know they can find their niche. So the fourth stage is called identity acceptance. So the first three stages are really internalized, and then stages 4, 5, and 6 are more outwardly focused. So this is the beginning of the what's known as the gay adolescence. So for straight people who get to date and talk about crushes and experience romantic feelings openly, they mature around parents and peers and as they get to talk about those things. So for LGBTQ teens who don't get to do that, they don't have the same emotional maturation when it comes to like crushes and love and romance. And so if we come out later in life, we are kind of like teenagers, but as adults. And so
I'd say more like preteens.
We are preteens as adults.
I went from a 24-year-old man to a 11-year-old girl immediately.
Yeah. And so if you think about, like I like this person, therefore we're going to get married, like think about all the ways you viewed like romance and crushes when you were in like middle school. And this is often what it's like for someone who's just coming out. Like they'll be having similar feelings. And this is when people start to have, anger towards homophobic elements of society, and those doubts and self-hatred start to be pointed outward. So instead of like, I'm bad, I'm wrong, this part of society is bad, or this thing is wrong and bad. And much like adolescents, LGBTQ folks in the stage will start to seek privacy and new friends as they're exploring their sexual orientation.
An important / scary time, especially if people decide to date, they go into like a very adult dating scene without experience or boundaries or knowledge of who they are or what they want. I see that happen to a lot of people. And also, gosh, these are good, Ben. These are really good. Yeah, I got mad. I got really mad during this stage.
Mm-hmm.
I was so mad. I was annoyed at church culture and its society. And it was so funny because a couple years before, I had been really upset about the Supreme Court's ruling on gay marriage because I was still in the stage 1. And I was like, how dare they? The gays are terrible. And then a couple years later, looking back at all the people in my life who were fighting that or against that, I was enraged at them for not caring or seeing why it was important, you know?
Yeah, I just wanted the church to not be true. I was so mad that the church was like keeping me from like being who I wanted to be that I just like wanted it to not be true. And I went to like all these anti-Mormon sites, like read stuff to like teach myself that the church wasn't true. That also didn't work for me.
Well, I didn't know that about you.
Really?
You're so unaffected by the internet. You read so many things and you're like, I'm just going to be gay in LDS anyway.
Oh, man.
Well, actually, I'll tell a quick side story. I read this thing about the Book of Abraham, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a smoking gun. Like, the Book of Abraham is so made up. Hallelujah, I am free. This is all made up. And I was like, I should read the Book of Abraham before I, like, throw it all away. Like, it's not that long. So I sat down and read it, and I, like, felt the Holy Ghost, like, really strong. I was like, oh, shoot. I believe this stuff. And, yeah, I couldn't let it go.
I love it. So from my perspective, I mean, kind of going back to that, my brain could literally not handle how I felt so mature in all of these areas. And romantically, I was just going, if I step back and look at this situation, it's not a big deal at all, but it just felt so big. And it was because in that dynamic, I was completely immature. And there was a period of time where I was dating both men and women. I just remember being completely frustrated. It was like my brain could not fathom how I was just so immature in the way that
in the
I
one
was,
aspect.
Yeah, it was completely just frustrating, honestly. And then as far as like the other piece of it, I've actually experienced maybe even the opposite, where it wasn't even that I was upset. I think I was just so relieved that I felt more comfortable, more full of love, more self-embracing, that I was going, oh wow, this isn't this horrible thing that I had thought it maybe was. And it's obviously there's waves of emotion over time, and so I probably don't follow these steps exactly, but at this point I was definitely feeling like, wow, this is beautiful, and I'm feeling comfortable.
Yeah, I think it was like a new kind of difficult. And for me, it was easier in a way because it was less internalized, but it was also more difficult in the sense that I had to like start navigating society as a gay person.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know that often LGBTQ folks will distance themselves from family and friends because they feel like they might be rejected if they knew what was going on. So it's important to really be part of our loved ones' lives at this stage. Like I have a friend who just started dating men, and he's gay. He knew that his parents wouldn't be okay with it, so he asked me if he could like text me every time he went on a date, so he would like have someone to check in with. And I was like, of course, please text me, like keep me involved in this. I want to be part of this. So the more we can be involved, we can help people, not make those mistakes because they're in a gay adolescence where they're not super mature in dating. And also, it's important to know that people in this stage might experience a lot of grief over their lost years, quote unquote lost years. Like, well, I didn't date when I was in my teens or my early 20s. I've lost all that time, therefore I need to make it up.
Yeah, I also want to make a point that I don't think you have to be dating to experience the gay adolescence.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, like there's like societal and cultural considerations that you just like don't know, that you like stumble through because you're new at being gay, even though you've been gay forever.
Yeah, definitely. All right, stage 5 is called identity pride. This is when the gay adolescence is in full swing. Your gay age, quote unquote, might not match your chronological age. And this is when people can engage in maybe like dangerous or what's viewed as like oppositional or defiant behavior. And this is when people tend to like over-identify with the gay subculture. They'll be devouring books on the subject and information about the culture. And previous repression becomes liberation. So you can think of people, waving pride flags, and like every time we're talking, it's about being gay. And my pride stage was a little different because, I was always like, I was active in the church. I wasn't dating, but this is when I came out on my blog, and I blogged a lot. Like if you look at like the first year when I came on my blog, I was blogging multiple times a month about being gay. Like I talked about this all the time.
In a way, we're still kind of doing that. you know, we host a podcast about this.
Do we know?
When I was in this stage, I wore a crop top to Pride. That was my gay rebellion.
I feel like I missed out on this stage a little bit. Maybe it's still coming.
Yeah, maybe you're not there yet, Scott.
Yeah, it'll take me another 10 years. With all things.
2 years, maybe.
Then he's still in stage 4. That's so embarrassing.
He's such a stage 4 gay.
No, but I think I've sort of maybe not experienced the stage like in its fullest yet, or maybe it will come later, but I do remember one time meeting with a therapist out of desperation. I only met with him once. But I was just experiencing a lot, and he actually brought this phase up specifically, and he said, I just want you, he said, I don't know if we'll ever meet again, but he said, I see a lot of young men just like you, and I kind of see them go from white to black overnight. Mm-hmm. And he said, I just want you to remember this, and that is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And even though I didn't feel like he was a good fit for me as far as being a therapist, I will always remember him saying that. It did help me as I, was kind of going through the stages of grief and learning more, etc. And have I handled it all perfectly? No. But, this stage is important. I think it's one that's, people can express it in different ways. I've never done the crop top thing. I haven't had a podcast or a blog. But
they're very easy to start.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the stage is incredibly important. So it's interesting to hear how you guys responded.
How did that advice from that therapist direct you? Like, how did that change your course?
I think for me, I was maybe a little overly cautious at first. It's kind of like I looked at my life as if it were like this shattered piece of glass. And it was like, I want to examine each piece of this larger piece of glass and say, what are the things that I want to keep? What are things that I want to add to it? And what are things that I can maybe discard? And I think his point was, you're a fantastic person. You've built a beautiful life. It's founded on sound principles. Don't throw it all away in anger or maybe in a means of covering pain or trying to at least mask it.
That's beautiful. When I kind of look back at the stage, and honestly, I want to say that these last 3 to 4 stages, I kind of toggle between quite a bit. I don't know if they're like cut and dried. Except for this one for me, I can look back and like chronologically say, this is when this started for me, and this is pretty much when it started ending. Mm-hmm. And I look back at that, and like you, Ben, I have always been active in the church, and I didn't like ever jump off too deep of a deep end, right? But I look back at this time, and I'm kind of embarrassed by some of the things I did. Not that they were like overtly terrible or anything, but I'm just like, wow, that was a lot,
like when you bleached your hair.
Yeah, I bleached my hair. I moved to New York. I wore a crop top. like I was like, I'm gay and I'm going to show it. It is like kind of crazy as that was. P.S. Ben and the listeners, my bleached hair looked hot. Okay, Ben always gives me crap for it. It was a look.
It was a phase. For sure.
I let it go out. That's when the phase ended. But it was actually a really important time for me too, because I was like feeling liberated, and I was able to like release a lot of that energy that had been pent up in me for a really long time. Mm-hmm. So as embarrassing it is to go back on Instagram and be like, wow, beach pic with bleached hair. I'm like, I kind of needed that in a way to kind of get back to who I actually am.
I feel like it's almost like this, hey, I need a break from code switching so badly that I need to do this thing, and give me that bottle of bleach right now.
Right.
Or, and I think it's just exhaustion, honestly. I think it's, hey, I have been trying to project X, Y, and Z to cover A, B, and C, and now I just need to stop that behavior and see what comes out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because, looking back on my own experience, I was so tired of pretending to be straight that I just like wanted everyone to know that I was gay. Just right. Like I don't want to pretend anymore. I just want everyone to know who I am.
Well, and I think that's why when people come out, it's viewed as so in your face and loud, because we're in that moment where that's how we feel and that's how we are. Like I feel like this is mostly when people come out or right after they come out publicly, right? Mm-hmm. And then other people see this like loud behavior and think that that's what it's about, but really there's 4 stages behind this that you never saw.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just to Ben's point, I think it is just like, man, it'd be super easy just for people to know. Because I think for me, I never did a post where I was like, hey, this is me, and like take it or leave it. And I think that I was so sensitive to the energy that I wanted to project that I just didn't say anything. That I wanted to just let it happen and unfold naturally. But I think there's a beautiful part to just saying, hey, I need to define this and I want it communicated broadly. And, at times I've maybe like criticized maybe how or why and when people did it. But honestly, to your point, Charlie, like, I don't know what people have experienced and I don't know how to best express what they need to express. And so I think however people do it is personal to them and appropriate.
Yeah. One more thing about this stage. I remember specifically I was on an overnight flight and I realized that I knew nothing about gay culture. And I guess kind of like that lost years thing we were talking about. I was like, I don't know anything about my people. Yeah. And so I went to the Wikipedia page for homosexuality and it's long. Like it's the history of all things gay since like the dawn of time. And I read the whole thing and it took me like 4.5 hours on this plane. But I was like, I didn't know any of this. And I was reading about Stonewall and riots and gay liberation efforts and all of these things that I just never stepped into because I'd always avoided. And that was also like meaningful to me. And I don't know. I'm glad I know that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because I even find myself now, sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's not me. And then I'm like, yeah, it is. I need to read that. And so I think there is just something like deeply ingrained at times where you kind of like get used to separating yourself. And so I think embracing and like acknowledging what about our demographic is beautiful and, the history behind it all. I mean, there's a lot of meaning. And, I always kind of had like this aversion to the rainbow flag. And I'm like, I only do neutrals. But it's like, it is what it is.
Which in and of itself is pretty gay.
Scott, when you decorate my house, I want you to put rainbows everywhere.
All right, you got it. Maximalism to the max.
When we do my house, we're going to make it neutrals.
Okay, deal.
Okay, I want neutrals too.
Maybe like a pop of turquoise.
Yeah, we'll do something. We'll spice it up.
Yeah. Oh, and just some considerations for straight people who have loved ones in this phase. Your LGBTQ loved ones might seem kind of in your face, and realize that like we said before, like often we're tired. We're tired of hiding, and it's important to just be patient and be with people on this phase. So the last stage is identity synthesis, and this is when the concept of us versus them breaks down. LGBTQ folks will reintegrate into larger society, not just the LGBTQ subculture, and heterosexism and homophobia no longer dominate their lives. Sexuality becomes part of one's identity instead of all of one's identity. I also want to say about, any stage model, like you said, Charlie, these aren't all just cut and dried, and, people can go back and forth or be in multiple stages at once.
For me, this phase has been one of the most beautiful and maybe even healing. I mean, am I healed? No. I mean, healing's just a tool. It's not the destination. It's like now I'm able to really focus on like, hey, I really want to connect with other people and hey, I want to express myself freely and creatively and I want to feel like, I'm able to really build a life. I mean, right now, for example, I'm a family of one. I may expand, I may not. But as I've really been able to look at my life in a very healthy way and say, hey, like, this is what's available to me. This is who I am, and this is what I'm choosing to do with it. And I feel like I'm able to do that efficiently and honestly. That's been incredibly beautiful for me.
For me, the difference between the previous stage and this one can be like almost perfectly illustrated between the difference in Pride 2018 versus Pride 2019. As I've mentioned before, I was wearing the crop top in 2018 and it was in that kind of like crazy look at me phase. And then the next year, I was actually doing a campaign with AT&T for their Young Heroes Pride segment. And so they were doing like this documentary and following my journey to Love Loud, which is a festival that I performed at. So I was there, I was dressed a lot more modestly and like just feeling a lot more like in control of myself. By this time I'd processed a lot of things and I'd done some like speaking engagements and was like kind of figuring out who I was. I started working on my book, so I was like processing a lot of information. So I'm leading this float for AT&T, and honestly, I was feeling like a complete rock star. I was like, I am cool. This is me. It's Pride. Like, I'm finally figuring things out. Let's go. And as I was walking along, I was like, oh my gosh, it's Sunday. Like, this is the Lord's Day. This is the Sabbath. And I was like, I want to go to church. It was just so funny because, like, Whereas before, I probably would have been like, I'm not going to church. It's pride. Like, I'm choosing gay. I was like, why am I going to do this? Like, I'm just going to choose me and be who I am. So I like wrapped things up with the parade, and I was supposed to go to this like other part. And I just excused myself. I was like, hey, thanks, camera crew. I'll be back in like an hour. There's something I want to go take care of. So I just went to the church building, and I wasn't in church clothes. I was in like my pride outfit. Definitely. Thankfully, it was modest.
Right? Modest is
hottest. And but it was like obviously like I had been at Pride, and I went in and I took the sacrament and I worshipped and I sang hymns with the congregation, and it was really, really beautiful. And that day was like the manifestation of like these both parts of who I am that society has always told me were in direct opposition with each other. And I really felt synthesis. And I feel like ever since that moment, that's kind of been my approach. Like I'm going to incorporate both of these in a way that is true to who I am. And I don't have to be like trying so hard to push myself into stage 1 or like freaking out on the opposite side of the pendulum in stage 5. I can just be like synthesized and
I think that's incredible.
And be me.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, whether someone's religious or not, just being able to exist in a space where you're able to express yourself freely and I think just the expectations. I feel like people just expect certain things, and being able to live in a way where those expectations don't influence how you live, I think that's a beautiful space.
Yeah. And as I've been thinking about this, I feel like I was on a pendulum where I was like not gay at all, and then I swung completely the other way, and I was like gay was like so important to who I am. And now I'm in a place where, I mean, my sexual orientation is still very important to who I am, but I just view it as like one part of who I am. I mean, you say this a lot, Charlie, like most of your friends are straight.
yeah.
I think it's important to get to a place where, it's just part of who we are instead of all of who we are or none of who we are.
Yeah, I feel much more stable and much more healthy here. And I'm not saying that like I'm completely synthesized, but I have like I feel that synthesis in my life. I feel much more at peace. Like there's not like seas that rage in my heart. It's like usually pretty calm.
Mm-hmm. It's been a humbling experience, to be totally honest. I think kind of relying on those core principles and values that I've like always had and known. I think that's helped tremendously through the process, and it's allowed me to be much more healthy. Not only has it allowed me to love myself more, but ultimately it's allowed me to love other people in a more meaningful way. I feel much more compassionate for any kind of circumstance. I mean, it could be the smallest thing, and I am just wanting to be there for you. And I think it's honestly because of those dark times that now I can admit that I had.
One thing I want to say is these stages aren't just what LGBTQ folks go through, but also family members and close loved ones go through very similar stages of wishing that this weren't real, to starting to like peek into the world, to maybe being in like a pride phase, and then this is just part of who my child or my brother or my cousin is. If we come out and we're at a phase where we're good, or we're in a pride phase, or maybe a phase where we're just starting to accept who we are, and our loved ones are at a place where they're like, no, this can't be a thing. Like that's a very normal developmental process for them, and it takes them time to learn and go through the same development that we've gone through if we're a little farther ahead. And I remember I had this weird moment during right after the 2015 policy came out. My parents took it incredibly hard. Like they saw it like as the church like attacking their son. And it was hard on me, but not nearly as hard as it was on them. And we had this like weird role reversal where I was like trying to like tell them that it was going to be okay and like comforting them because they were in a place where like, how could the church do this? And I was like, it'll be fine. Like they still love me, they still want me, it's going to be okay. And it's interesting that our loved ones go through very similar stages.
Yeah, I feel that, and I've seen that. Ben, what advice would you give to someone who's listening to this and maybe identifying like with stage 2 per se? Quiz, what's stage 2?
Identity comparison.
Oh, he's good. So maybe they're identifying with that and feeling like, oh, maybe that sounds like me, and they're listening to us talk about like stage 5 or stage 6, this synthesis. Like, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I would say give yourself a lot of grace and be very patient with yourself. And I think it would be unfair to expect to go through years of development immediately. And, to realize that, if you're in your early or mid 20s, you're not going to be who you are. Like, there's no way you can get to 35 or 36 without going through those years. And so I would say just be really patient with yourself and honest with yourself and honest with those around you, and give yourself time to grow.
just live.
Yeah.
Just live. And if these help you, if it helps you kind of understand where you're at and it helps you build boundaries and figure out coping mechanisms and skills that keep you healthier and safer, wonderful. But if you're trying to like rush and figure something out, like don't maybe not put that on you.
Right. Well, it's like I always like to remind myself that Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every day. And I think that's something like incredibly important. And I think even one thing I would say, I know it's not completely relevant to this question, but just keep the conversation and dialogue going with your family. And, you know, obviously maybe during a couple of the phases, you're not going to feel comfortable talking to them about it. But I think giving them permission and yourself permission to be involved in these stages is important and sort of our responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we let people in no matter where we are in the journey. We have to let people in.
Yep.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. I loved this. I'm glad we switched up the question.
Yeah, this is awesome. I appreciate you guys.
I hope everyone listens to this.
They better.
Share this episode with all your friends, please.
Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this or other episodes, please consider leaving us a rave review. And as always, please remember that we do not represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Brigham Young University. We're not trying to tell anyone what to think. Sorry.
I'm laughing. I love a rave review. 5 stars, people. 5 stars only. And this also proves that we re-record this segment every time this isn't a recording.
Anyway, we are not trying to be prescriptive or tell anyone what to think or what to do.
You heard 3 perspectives, and there are many, many more. We encourage you to listen to other voices and hear a wide variety of experiences. If you would like to submit a question or share a comment about today's episode, you can email us at questionsfromthecloset@gmail.com. Until next time.